knowledge is different from wisdom. And I think fundamentally the biggest problem for our young people is to discern truth, to understand what is valid and what is reliable. That's it.
Cast your mind back to when you were younger. How did you want to change the world? What skills and opportunities do you wish you had to succeed? And now, fast forward to today. Do you believe young people have these skills and opportunities? In Youth We Trust sits down with successful entrepreneurs, business leaders, educators, and others from around the world. We spotlight how individuals and organisations are shaping a better world, directly or indirectly, for the coming generations, through their focus on sustainability, equity, education, and more, to empower young people to create the future they deserve. And now, in Youth We Trust.
In this episode, we embark on a dialogue with Michael Lambert, Headmaster at Dubai College, one of the most prestigious schools in the Gulf region. He shares rich anecdotes from his youth to emphasize the need for young people to take greater risks and build resilience despite social pressures to conform. But more importantly, he talks with uncanny candor and clarity on topics such as AI and the role school, industry, and the government needs to play to prepare the next generation for the future.
Good afternoon, Michael, and welcome to In Youth We Trust podcast.
Hello, Prashant. Thanks ever so much for inviting me.
Yes, I can't tell you how excited I am actually to be talking to one of the leading educators and leaders. Michael, as you know a little bit, at Lumi, we are all about running quests for young people to expose them to the greatest problems that humanity is facing, and also to build through that the skills they need for the future. Now, let me start by taking you right back to your younger self. And if you were to participate in a quest where you had a chance to shape an important issue, what would that quest be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, reflecting on my younger self, I mean, I have to say I was a relatively wayward youth who got into all sorts of trouble when I was certainly at secondary school. So I was relatively directionless for a while at secondary school. I was pretty good on the academics, but didn't really have a clear direction. But I think latterly, in my sort of teens and early 20s, I kind of always hoped or thought that I might be some sort of latter day, 20th century, 21st century Indiana Jones kind of buccaneering anthropologist, archaeologist type, exploring the world for kind of cultural experiences and sort of having an open-minded approach to what was going on elsewhere, outside of the pretty cloistered existence that I had in a little village in the middle of Warwickshire in the middle of England, which was sort of very, very traditionally British.
Right. And was there a topic that particularly meant a lot to you? Was there something that was frustrating you about the system or in society?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it was more about open-mindedness. I did feel kind of pretty straight-jacketed. Don't get me wrong, I had a lovely childhood, but as I say, it was very traditionally sort of white English middle class in the countryside, and there was a certain way of doing things. And I lived in a small village outside of a small town, and after a while, it just kind of felt like there was more in the world. So I loved my first degree, which was in classics and kind of immersing myself in the Greco-Roman world and experiencing a world that was broadly, very recognizable to our own, and yet subtly different in so many different ways. And I remember there's a quotation in Herodotus, and it quotes the Greek poet Pindar, who says that custom is king of all. And there's a scene, and it talks about two different groups in sub-Saharan Africa and the burial practices that they have. And one of the tribes would bury the dead under the ground, and thought that was the most honourable thing to do. And the tribe literally down the road would burn the dead. And if you talk to one another of the two tribes, they thought it was a horrendous thing to do, to burn your dead. And those who burnt the dead thought it was a completely unhygienic thing to bury your dead. And these guys were only a few miles apart. And I thought, God, isn't that curious that you can be living in a close geographical proximity and yet have completely different worldviews? And that's when I sort of kind of got, interested in anthropology, and that was my second degree. And at that point was when I really thought I wanted to be this sort of latter-day Indiana Jones. I traveled through Egypt for a while. I almost ended up buying a felucca, one of those sort of traditional sailboats, with a few Nubian guys that I'd met. They wanted to start a business. They thought I could bankroll that. And I nearly forewent the graduate program that I'd sort of got a place on after university, just to spend a year in Egypt. Because I thought, God, this is crazy and so different from my background. And then after that, in my mid-20s, I almost got a job running a school in Xinjiang province in Western China. Again, just because I was so aware that there were so many different ways to view the world. And I've always been very open-minded and always on the hunt for sort of experiences. So I guess the quest for me it was always more kind of an ideas-based quest about cultural understanding, bridging the gap, awareness, and open-mindedness.
Well, these are really, really important things, right? So I think if we fast forward to today, what is the greatest strength that the you of today can lend to your younger self to actually help him break free even faster?
I almost bought a felucca in southern Egypt, but I didn't. I almost ran a school in Xinjiang province in Western China, but I didn't. And both of those were great opportunities. It wouldn't in any way have slowed me down or hindered me or hampered my progress. I felt that there was an expectation upon me to do something that was perhaps more socially acceptable to my friendship group or to my parents or to the sort of background that I came from. So I didn't buy the felucca. I was a good boy. I went back to London and I started my graduate scheme at Barclays and did that for a few years. So the advice that I would give to my younger self is to have the courage, to pursue those opportunities when you're young, because in the grand scheme of things, we ebb and flow in our progress. Some people will start something sooner and they'll zoom off in the distance, but then they'll slow down and plateau. You may have been slow to start, but you'll catch up latterly. And there's this constant ebb and flow of progress through life. But I think and particularly young people today, they grow up with so much expectation heaped upon their shoulders from society, from what they read in the news, from the expectations about the world, from their parents, from their friends, etc., that they too are probably going to end up pursuing what are socially acceptable things when they should have the courage to throw off the shackles of social expectation, throw a little caution to the wind while they're young, throw themselves into those experiences, and then they can settle down and get a serious and sensible job and saddle themselves with debt. But there's no point in rushing that too soon.
It's such a good point, and I can so personally relate to it. If this advice to yourself, I think it actually applies to a very large percentage of young people globally, because if you look at them, and as I look at them as a parent, I feel like they're even more under, as you said, they're even more under pressure. So do you think, how do we give these young people this kind of freedom, and how do you actually give them the skills to be able to take those decisions?
One of the things that we do is that we have a sort of what we call a journeys program, where we get former students or staff or parents or people that they know and can relate to come and tell their story to the young people and explain their journey, because the journey is rarely linear. And you think, oh, well, yeah, I'd like to emulate that person. So how did they get there? And when they tell you this zigzag story of triumph and disaster that they've been through to get there, that in no way was it a linear path, and basically to give the young people permission to make mistakes and to go down some dead ends and to have to double back and to try again and to rebuild and regroup. And if they can hear that from someone who's done it, then I think that's the main thing. We need to give young people permission to explore and to remove the weight of expectation from their shoulders.
If you look at your role, how are you currently, personally, empowering young people to kind of develop these kinds of skills or develop that sense of perspective to take risks? I think we're talking actually about the ability to take risks and also about resilience, because things will work out as long as you have a certain set of skills. But how do you what are you doing today?
And I think there are several elements to what any school can and sort of does offer. And I think the areas where young people understandably are more reticent to take risks is in relation to the standardized curriculum that leads towards the qualification and the examination. So that we leave relatively untouched. How we approach teaching and learning is different. So there's a huge focus for us in the school on oracy. So there's a vertical thread all around communication, collaboration, challenging one another, questioning one another, linking learning across domains. It's very live, and I suppose it's very experiential and experimental at the same time. But really, you can't touch the curriculum. So the real areas to explore risk and resilience comes from the wider co-curricular and extracurricular opportunities that we give to the students, whether that's a Model United Nations team that's come together that learn to collaborate live on a topic or a theme that they've never approached before. And they're going to meet with these hurdles and obstacles. Things are going to go well. They're going to take 2 steps backwards before they take the great leap forward. Exposing to our students to as many opportunities like that. And particularly, I think, sport and international travel are the other 2 areas that we're particularly strong at here. So I suppose any situation that allows us to position students in a place where they can't have pre-planned an ordained route, as you do get from the academic curriculum, but actually requires them to respond live and in the moment. Now, those are the areas that they're going to teach this sort of risk-taking resilience.
So if I take your example, I mean, you would have gone on ahead and actually started your journey in Egypt. Mm-hmm. And that would have been a completely entrepreneurial journey. Mm-hmm. But there is at some point the risk of disappointing the society, but also this, not understanding what does it take to actually build something like this.
If we're talking about how we actually teaching our students explicitly about enterprise and entrepreneurship, at the moment, we are not. We are teaching our kids transferably in situations. Now, that doesn't mean that our students aren't enterprising and entrepreneurial. We've certainly got a digital skills curriculum for our younger year groups in years 7 and 8, so the students who are sort of 11 to 13. And basically, we teach them a set of digital skills, whether that's videography, whether that's running their own podcast, or whether they're running a video cast, whether they're creating an infographic. And then we take the UN Sustainable Development Goals and we say, right, you've got the skills to represent your ideas in a visually or auditory arresting way. So take one of these topics or take one of these big ideas and big problems, and you're going to work on a mini project using your digital skills and your creative thinking to work up potential solutions to these problems. So whilst it's not specifically business related, what they have got are big issues, a team environment, collaborating and thinking critically and creatively together, and then presenting that solution in a way that is understandable to their peer group and to anybody else that they want to sell it to, effectively in what we talk to the students a lot about, which is the attention economy. Because we are so bombarded with huge amounts of information on a daily basis, right? There is something vying for our attention every single second of the day. including at various points your teacher. And your teacher is vying for attention with all this other stuff, right? So how do you present your creative solution to this problem in a way that is arresting, that is going to capture attention in an attention economy where, on average, we're probably giving, 30 to 60 seconds of cursory attention to an issue or a topic. We read a headline. And I think for us, it's helping our students, A, to understand what they're up against, but also B, learning how they can compete in this attention economy with these digital skills that make it engaging for their audience.
This episode is brought to you by Lumi.network. We're on a mission to help the next generation get ready to take on the world. Our AI augmented platform runs quests that help 10 to 25-year-olds shape their future by developing AI, entrepreneurship, and design thinking skills to solve the most pressing business and social issues. If you or your organization wants to positively impact the next generation, we'd love to talk to you. To learn more, visit Lumi.network.
I think building on that, another challenge is, to actually be clearer about, what are the problems that these young people need to get involved with. We both know, and I'll soon be asking you about AI, which is a big one, but there is climate, there is AI, there is inequality, there is, or some of these things are captured very well in the United Nations goals, but not all of it. And these are so different. So for you, what are those 2 or 3 most important problems that these young people today need to get involved with to then secure their own future?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, it's a difficult one because I think it will be different for different students and different people. I mean, I think the thing is, it's accessing good knowledge. Being able to be a discerning student, researcher, consumer, to be able to separate the valid from the invalid in this culture where we are being bombarded with data and information. But information is different from knowledge, and knowledge is different from wisdom. And I think fundamentally, the biggest problem for our young people is to discern truth, to understand what is valid and what is reliable. That's it. And then how, once they know what the real issue is, not what the issue is that's being presented to them by some very big global organizations. You've got a huge marketing budget and a huge amount of power. We're all talking about the future of jobs because we're all being sold these very well packaged problems in a portfolio profile, and we're going, oh yes, this is what we must focus on. And it reminds me of that old Monty Python sketch from The Life of Brian, where Brian is trying to tell all of his followers, he's like, look, you're all individuals, and they're all standing outside his balcony, and they chant back up to him, we're all individuals. And that's the problem. We are all individuals. And it's like, yes, and we've all got these identical problems. Well, we haven't. We've all got very localized problems.
Yes,
and
that's a very
there
good
are
point.
some big global problems as well. But it's helping our students to zoom out and to zoom in and to ascertain what is right here and right now the major issue. One of the things that I worry about for young people as well is the zombie stat that we constantly hear and read about, that something like 85% of jobs that will exist in 2030 have not yet been invented. If you dig into that, there's some really interesting research pieces. That's why I call it a zombie stat. So A, it's been debunked. I don't know who came up with it in the first place. There's a really good Radio 4 program that tries to find the source of some of these phrases that we use on a regular basis. And when they actually found out where it came from, it wasn't that at all. It was 85% of the jobs that students in Europe wanted to do by the time they were adults, they were not yet equipped to do. And there's a really good research piece that's just come out of Australia as well that basically says, if you track job advertisements on the biggest job databases, there are a small number of these emerging roles. But predominantly, all the roles that we still need will remain. So I've got terrified teenagers going, well, I'm not even sure that the job that I want to do will be there by the time I get to adulthood. Chances are, if it involves some sort of humane and human critical thinking and interaction, it will be there. So I think the world perhaps, and it comes back to all the Hans Rosling stuff about factfulness. Sometimes there are these big, scary ideas that are peddled by the media because they sell, that may not actually fundamentally be true, that are worrying our young people. So for me, it comes back to being discerning. What knowledge is true, valid, and reliable? And for me, that's probably the biggest issue facing the youth.
That's such a good point. I think you said many things, but I think having the ability to judge and discern. I mean, I remember an instance in one of the quests where we had young people from Mexico and we had people from India and we had people from London. So they started to talk about just how polluted London was. And they were so convincing, to your point, right? That everybody from India and Mexico suddenly believed that, wow, the city that we wanted to visit and we so much love because we see it as one of the most polluted cities in the world. And then what we did was we actually gave them a link to a website which allows you to compare cities. And then they found that Mexico City was within the top 10. Delhi was in top 10. And London was 64th. So that's the point you're making, right? Factfulness, understanding facts, which suddenly the whole virtual room went quiet. The issues that technology is now giving rise to is fake news. And it's going to actually only proliferate. The thing is that young people need to be involved and actually have a say in some of these things. But before that, they need to develop that knowledge and that understanding of what the problem really is. But there is another point, which was about a section of society developing that. How do you equitably develop this in society? But that lopsided nature of your development in itself is creating so much challenge.
Yeah.
So how would you do that, and how are you doing it?
When you look at the contemporary mandate for a school, it seems that a school becomes the locus for fixing everything. So we're responsible for providing young people with foundational knowledge, which they need in order to then move on to more advanced and creative thinking. But we've got a mental health epidemic among young people. Greater levels of anxiety and depression. There's a really great FT article back in March that tracks it back to the advent of the smartphone, and when it went from being a luxury item to a ubiquitous item, and we spend so much time online. So we've got a mental health and anxiety issue that's affecting young people, which schools are being asked to deal with. So we've got fundamental knowledge, fundamental skills, mental health and well-being, talking about the dangers of social media. We've got a proliferation and understanding of neurodiversity and how we need to be teaching differently and being adaptive for every single student within our care. We need to get our students ready for the careers that they're going to face in the future. We need to get our students ready to act in a socially just way when they join a community and society. I mean, there's so many things that sit within the school to be its responsibility. So how can we be equitable in delivering all of this? I mean, ultimately, this is where government needs to come in. Government needs to understand, okay, we need to give everybody access to this sort of thing. I think when we first talked, we were talking about artificial intelligence in particular. If I sort of use that as an example, how many hours a day are you spending on social media? 2 hours, half the room, 3 hours, a quarter of the room, 4 hours, the sort of remaining quarter. So that room was spending between 2 and 4 hours per day on social media. I mean, that's a huge amount, 28 hours in a week. That's an 8th day in the week that they could gain if they didn't have their sort of social media usage. So you'll be aware that large language models, came online with a bang last October with ChatGPT. How many of you are currently using something like ChatGPT or another platform like that to help you with your learning? Just under half. I'm trusting these kids because they're telling me that they're spending 4 hours a day on social media, so they're not holding back on the gory details. So just under half said that they were, and I was like, okay, so over half of you aren't yet, and they said, yeah, we're not, and I was like, well, why not? I said, well, we don't really, it's not of interest to us yet because it's not really gone that far up their agenda. We don't really know that much about it. Like, it doesn't seem of interest. I can't see how it would help, and it's not a priority. So what you had, even in a school like mine, in one class, you had this massive split, which was therefore effectively inequitable, because there's a digital poverty that goes with the half of the room that aren't using it. The half that are learning about it, they're becoming more skilled in it.
Yes.
So what we're now looking at as a school is introducing 14, or at least UNESCO have found about 14 countries plus 3 non-governmental organizations that have produced these AI competency frameworks. And our view is that this isn't telling them that they should use it or necessarily how to use it. It's what is it? Is it a good thing? Is it something that you can use? How is it constructed? How is it going to be used? What are the risks? What do you need to be aware of? So our job as educators is to make sure that everybody is at least brought up to the same baseline level of knowledge. And that's where you're going to get the equitability on this. But until there's a national program, it could end up that our school puts this in place, but all the other schools in town don't. And then suddenly the students at DC have got that sort of digital advantage to an extent. So this stuff,
definitely,
really needs to come at a sort of national level.
That's right. I think that's why you were talking about the Minister for AI in this region. What are the other things you're doing to prepare this young generation for AI, Michael?
Well, yeah, I mean, at this initial stage, I mean, it's, I think, let's be honest, most schools, like probably most organizations, have been kind of caught on the back foot. I don't think anybody really knew or anticipated that ChatGPT would be released last October. And suddenly the horse has bolted. And we're all now looking at it, tearing off into the distance, going, yeah, we should probably get that thing under control. But the fact is, at the moment, the EU AI Act, which is the first sort of piece of legislation that I'm aware of, is only going to come into force at the end of this calendar year. So governments have not yet got themselves into gear to produce AI legislation. So what we're left doing as a school is we're working with our staff at the moment to go, look, a school fundamentally is an institution whose role is to safeguard children, safeguard them so that they're ready for the future, but also to safeguard them from harm. And that includes online harm, access to damaging content. That includes protecting their data, ensuring that we've got consent, that we're not exposing them to dodgy or corrupt or polluted knowledge, that we're not exposing them to discriminatory language or knowledge that comes out of these sort of models and platforms. So at the moment, as a school, what we're working on are 10 guiding principles that do come out of UNESCO. And first and foremost, we're upskilling our staff and our senior middle leaders to go, look, we need to put in the guardrails first. That will be our base. Then, once we've got the guardrails in place, we know that we shouldn't be processing or sharing student data online in a public platform because we've got no idea where that information is going to go. Do we all know that? Our parents are aware. There's a great video called "Without Consent" from a German telecom company, which takes the image of a young girl and ages her, and her parents are in the cinema, and this older version of the daughter talks to the mum and dad, and they're absolutely horrified. But they've taken a sample of her voice, they've taken her image and aged her, and they've created this deep fake that I think you were sort of alluding to earlier. So as a school, first and foremost, we've got to be really, really careful. We're not putting any personal data in a public platform that relates to any of our children or our staff for that matter. So at the moment, we're really working hard on the guardrails. And I think what we're going to end up with is creating really quite a small box. And go, right, assuming you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't do the other, you don't do this, because our job is to look after children. Well, if you can do all of that, then we're going to adopt a pro-innovation approach to AI, because we need to expose our students to this so they don't have this digital poverty. We need to teach them the generic competencies around AI, but we also need to teach them about domain-specific uses of AI. So there may be some stuff in music that's quite different to what you can access in, say, mathematics. So that requires our staff to have the time and the training to understand, well, what is available in our domains. And it's evolving so quickly all the time. I mean, this could become, in and of itself, a full-time role for a head of AI.
You've talked about the role of the government. Do you think businesses have a role to play? I mean, I'm stepping back from AI, but actually zooming out and looking at all these different problems that young people are facing. Because on the one hand, we hear that businesses often complain that young people are not ready for the world of work. They have degrees but no skills. So is it time now that we actually try and foster that kind of collaboration? But if so, how?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've had a bee in my bonnet about this before, because, as I say, it seems that everything trickles down to the school.
Yeah, you're right.
Again, and it's like, well, hang on a sec. If we're not getting our students ready for what you need, well, where is this competency framework for workplace readiness that you have created in neatly digestible format that says, we would really like you to be giving your students this so that by the time they join us, they'll have that? Why does it come back to the school yet again? If industry is concerned, then industry must find the solution and support schools in order to deliver that. That's my view.
That's a very, very good point. But I think this is really where entrepreneurs and forward-thinking leaders, I think, can make a difference in trying to positively affect this kind of change. Now, let me ask you, take you completely into the future. And, and if we go super far into the future, what is your craziest prediction about AI? Because this is a topic you're passionate about.
I've got to be honest. I'm probably marginally less ignorant about this topic. At the moment, generative AI doesn't understand anything. It's not cognizant. The way that large language models work and generative AI works is it's all about statistics. If you ask it a prompt, it will find some information and it will put it together statistically and probably which words follow one another to make a plausible text. That's it. It's got no idea whether it makes sense. So at the moment, artificial intelligence is a bit of an oxymoron because it's not intelligent. It understands nothing. It's not capable of thinking critically and coming up with new solutions. It can just follow a series of rules. Now, will it ever reach the point where it is sentient? I've absolutely no idea. Large language models, for example, are based on the sum total of publicly available knowledge. Now, when you generate an answer from the training material, which is the internet, and it produces an answer, and then you pass that answer off as your own. So say I wrote a newsletter for Dubai College, but I got generative AI to write it for me. Then I published that on my LinkedIn profile. That goes back into the pot of knowledge, but it was made out of that knowledge. So it reinforces that knowledge. And if that information, I should say, was wrong, you just get another version of that information. So technically, I suppose, bad actors can pollute the internet with false information, which then generative AI produces answers for you, which we take at face value and regurgitate, which goes back into the pot, which amplifies that false knowledge. So that's my biggest concern, I think.
It's a very, very important point. I read a very interesting quote that AI is a child, treat it like a child. And that means how you behave with it, how you actually start to interact with it, it's going to start picking up all of those things. And it'll actually then start behaving exactly like that. So therefore, if you're asking random things, and if you're actually, as you point out, you're getting random information, but you're feeding that back into it, then 20 years later, we'll have this massive problem where it's become the very thing we didn't want us to become, which is why I personally, I bring it back to youth. It's extremely important to educate young people about this problem, the factual understanding of these issues rather than opinions. And actually, this is why also by doing, you're able to learn rather than just reading.
There's a great thread that runs through the UNESCO guidance on AI in education and research. which is exactly your point. And it's the point about human agency.
Yeah.
We must not steal from human beings the thing that makes humans human, which is your ability to interact, to collaborate, to think critically, to come up with novel solutions to big problems. We can be creative enough to come up with the novel solutions. So we must let young people know they've got a gift as a human being, that they are critical thinkers and they are humane. And we need to help them exercise those skills as much as possible and not abrogate that gift that they've been given as a human to an unthinking machine.
That's such a good point. Well, look, it's been absolutely great talking to you, Michael. Thank you so much for being on the In Youth We Trust podcast and for giving up your time and also sharing your views and wisdom.
It's been a great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you found this conversation valuable, please leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you have a story or someone you know does, please recommend them to us by email at hello@lumi.network. We'll see you next time on In Youth We Trust.